Chapter 5 Love, Hope, and Fear Teachers Guiding Desegregation. In the fall of 1967, Harriet DeSalle Kuykendall and Joanne Pritchard Morris, both white teachers in the segregated Yazoo City school system, began team teaching a high school humanities/social science course. The idea for the class began as a lark of two teachers who were bored in a workshop they did not want to attend. Harriet explained, "I did not want to take the class. It was just a waste of time. I didn't need it, and I went to the superintendent and said, I've already had it in my course of study, and he said, we can't let you off because we're not going to let any black teacher off, so you have to do it." So Joanne and I were sitting on the back row, and we were almost being rude to the nice man who was teaching the class and leading us into writing the course of study. At one point, he came back to see what we were doing on the very back row, and because we didn't want to be rude to him, began to make things up. And we said we were writing the perfect class, and it's a mixture of English and history because she, Joanne, taught English, and I was teaching history at the time. He said, "That's a good idea, just keep on writing." Their concocted class morphed into an experiment. They would teach the class course in the morning to all white students at Yazoo City High School, and then repeat the course in the afternoon to the black students at N.D. Taylor High. Joanne and Harriet's experiment was met with skepticism and resistance from some of the black students at N.D. Taylor. Harriet was a veteran teacher with close to 20 years of experience. Joanne was a fairly new teacher, but both were part of the established white power structure of Yazoo City. Harriet was the wife of newly elected State Senator Herman DeSalle, and Joanne's husband, a Harvard graduate, worked as the assistant to the president of the Mississippi Chemical Corporation. When they arrived at N.D. Taylor on the first day of class, a teacher pulled them into the principal's office and preferred this frank warning. "You women need to know right now that we're not going to tell you the truth. Black people are not going to tell you the truth." Joanne understood his message. Black teachers might greet them with polite triviality. "We're so glad to have you here." But a veneer of distrust simmered beneath that civil facade. Their mere presence as volunteer teachers teaching a class they were created reflected the long-standing inequities and power relations between black and white teachers in the school system. It was a privilege no black teacher would ever have to create a new course with little or no input from anyone, team taught with a friend and colleague, and be trusted with the freedom of travel from school to school. While the class originated accidentally, Joanne and Harriet were dedicated to it and to the students at both schools. It was also an adventure to them, a foray into uncharted territory that held an element of excitement in April 1968, when word got out that the black students were planning a march in response to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One of Joanne's black students called her and warned her not to come to the school that day. Principal at Yazoo City High was also fearful for them and sent Harriet a note. "Do not leave campus today." Harriet and Joanne ignored his warning, as Harriet explained. "So we hid in the ladies' room so we couldn't be found. We usually waited until 1 o'clock to go, but this time we left at 12 and had lunch elsewhere. And then we went to the class. Their volunteering to integrate the black school with this 2-hour class also served as an instrumental purpose for the superintendent and school board. It gave them evidence to present the HEW that their district was cooperating with school desegregation mandates. Joan recalls, "I don't know how many times Mr. Kelly, the superintendent, said, 'Y'all saved my neck.' He then left them alone to teach the class as they wanted, with the caveat, 'As long as I don't hear about you at the post office, do what you want to do.'" Like many white teachers thrust into school desegregation, their experience at N.D. Taylor High transformed Harriet and Joanne's attitude about segregation. Harriet explained, "I went over there thinking that separate but equal could work, and that what you had to do was to make certain that the black school was as well run and was challenging to students as well as the white school, because we had a good school in Yazoo City. Once I got into the school over there teaching, I realized it was impossible. There was no way that you were going to turn that school around without having white students in it, because the presence of white people was going to be very important." Teaching in both schools, they saw firsthand the inequities between the two beyond the noticeable discrepancies in textbooks, resources, and equipment. Other less obvious differences surfaced. For example, at Yazoo City High, students could take course as an elective course that they met every day. Such an elective was not available for the students at ND Taylor, where they had an outstanding choir. Instead, the choir teacher pulled students from their core classes to prepare for shows and competitions. According to Harriet, promptly we went to the superintendent and said she needs a class period, and the next year she got it. During court enforced desegregation, a few years later, Harriet and Joanne became part of the Friends of Public School movement in Yazoo City, a campaign launched by white business leaders to support public schools in their community. However, the role of white teachers in desegregating schools is not a monolithic narrative, nor does it always end in the transformation of teachers' heads and hearts. Indeed, many white teachers left the public schools at the first sign of desegregation. According to one report, 1,000 of the 23,000 public school teachers in Mississippi quit in the spring of 1970, many of them to teach in the new private academies. The exodus of white teachers was greatest in the school districts where white students also left the public schools en masse, most notably in the Delta. In Indianola, Sunflower County, 39 teachers resigned in spring 1970, leaving only 2 white teachers in the entire system. In the small town of Pickens, Holmes County, the entire faculty of 7 white teachers resigned. In Coahoma County, 1/3 of the white teaching force left in February 1970 when school desegregation was enforced there. In Tunica, 19 white teachers resigned in January 1970 to teach at the newly formed Tunica Church School, a private academy that did not charge any tuition the first semester. These former public school teachers achieved their full semester pay from the Tunica County School Board. As discussed in Chapter 2, some of the white teachers who stayed treated their black students intolerably, addressing them with derogatory names, insulting them for the rest of the class, and encouraging white students to harass them. Others looked the other way as their black students suffered innumerable abuses, like a white teacher in Rankin County who sat silently by while in his classroom the white students poured syrup over a black student's head. Unlike many white teachers who have had other teaching options, black teachers were completely dependent upon their local public schools for employment. However, they too approached school desegregation in various ways. Many celebrated it as the culmination of a long-awaited victory begun in 1954. Others, more wary, worried about their own job security and the education of their students in a potentially unwelcome, if not outright hostile, learning environment. They worried that the white teachers replacing them at the segregated black schools would not be as committed, compassionate, or concerned as they. Many black teachers outright balked at leaving their segregated schools, and others were anxious that the gross inequities inherent in segregated school systems would put them and their students at a disadvantage in a desegregated school system with, in many cases, higher academic standards and expectations. However, the majority of teachers, both black and white, stayed. Undoubtedly, many did so because in small town Mississippi, jobs were scarce. They needed a job and were not able to compromise their and their families' financial livelihoods. Many remained because they viewed teaching as their calling and were determined to work through school desegregation despite the many obstacles. Superintendents and school board members and principals took those orders and implemented them on their local schools. However, it would fall on the shoulders of teachers more than any other adults to determine how they and their students would live and learn together in the intimate space of the integrated classroom, as Dalton McAlpin, a young white teacher assigned in 1970 to a formerly all-black school in Jackson, reflected, "We had school, and learning occurred. It was tense for a while, for sure. We just kind of kept going, just trying to have school." Coercion and the luck of the draw, teacher assignment during desegregation. Lily B. Davis was born and reared in Quitman County in the Mississippi Delta. A child of sharecroppers, Lily graduated in 1947 as the valedictorian of the first high school graduating class from Marks Industrial High School. In 1957, she graduated from Rusk College in Holly Springs and began teaching in the segregated schools in her hometown. By 1969, she was a seasoned teacher with a reputation of being a good but firm teacher. Lily had heard rumblings about some black teachers being sent to Marks High, the white school, as part of the school desegregation plan. Lily did not want to be one of those sent to the white school under auspices of integrating the schools, so Lily spent the summer of 1969 deliberately avoiding the superintendent. However, one day his secretary managed to outmaneuver her. When she was at the courthouse for an unrelated matter, the superintendent's secretary cornered her. The superintendent wants to see you, she told Lily. About what? The secretary replied, you know what. Once inside his office, the superintendent informed Lily that if she wanted to continue being employed in Quitman County, she would be teaching second grade at Marks High, which housed grades 1 through 12, in the fall. Not one to back down, Lily told the superintendent, I'll go because I don't want my children to go, and I know I don't have any choice. You white people are vicious, you believe in killing black folks, that's why I don't want to go. Lily was concerned about the black students she would be leaving behind, whose educational and psychological needs were not clearly not driving decisions about how to implement desegregation. Such decisions were made first and foremost for the benefit of white students, who was looking out for the interests and needs of black students. This was a paramount question for Lily, as she was forced to leave her children to the care of teachers, most likely white and inexperienced, who she thought would not love, teach, or understand her black students as she had. She explains, I liked where I was. I enjoyed teaching where I was. I was satisfied where I was. I would teach any children, but I would rather have been over there because nobody understands how to teach black children but black people. And I knew that I would be able to help my black children, and I knew they needed a lot of help. White teachers don't really understand our black children and how to teach them. They think that black children can't learn. Their knowledge is limited. They have a poor home environment. Their parents are ignorant. They are uneducated. When the schools opened in August 1969, Lily Davis was one of the 4 black teachers teaching in predominantly white classrooms at Marks High. Mae D. Martin found herself in a similar situation in Cleveland, Mississippi in 1968. Mae D. was not a native of Mississippi. She moved to Cleveland from Texas in 54 and began teaching in 57 in a segregated school in which black students had a split session built around the cotton picking season. In 68, Mae D. and 4 other black teachers were chosen to teach in the predominantly white schools as part of the district's desegregation plan. 2 of the teachers were assigned to teach only handwriting and spelling. One taught home economics at Cleveland High, another was a librarian who rotated among 3 schools. Mae D. explained why they were given these teaching assignments. They didn't think blacks knew too much about teaching or being a teacher. However, Mae D. was assigned to teach reading. She is not sure why, perhaps because I came here with a master's degree. According to Mae D., there was another reason why these 5 teachers were chosen to be the first to integrate white schools. We had fair skin and nice hair and been in the school system for several years. Dr. Morris, the superintendent, knew us all. I guess you could refuse if you wanted to, but they chose who they wanted. Nobody too black. Black teachers, like Lily and Mae D., were pawns in their school system's efforts to implement court-enforced desegregation plans, which often began with faculty integration. Indeed, as late as 1969, many school districts were still clinging to the hope that school desegregation couldn't be accommodated with some carefully selected black teachers at white schools, and vice versa. And the continuation of FOC to desegregate white schools with a few black students. Their superintendent specifically handpicked Lily and Mae D. to integrate the white schools because they were good teachers. As Lily noted, they wanted the best teachers to teach their children. They had little say about their transfer, and neither felt that refusing was an option. Cindy Harrison, on the other hand, was not coerced or even strongly persuaded to be one of the only white teachers teaching at Central High, a black school in the Oxford City school system. Fresh out of college with an English degree, no other job prospects, Cindy eagerly accepted the only job offer she received in fall 1969. Like Lily Davis, Cindy Harrison was born and reared in the Mississippi Delta, but their worlds were vastly different. Cindy, who graduated from Ruleville High in 1964, could attend the college of her choice. When she chose Millsaps College, her grandmother was mortified. She believed, according to Cindy, there was a communist behind every bush at Millsaps. She graduated in 68 with a degree in English. Cindy did not immediately find a teaching job, so she worked for 1 year as a receptionist. In 69, she moved to Oxford so that her then husband could attend graduate school at the University of Mississippi. Her father-in-law, through a Rotary Club connection, arranged for her to meet with the superintendent of the Oxford City Schools. Much to her disappointment, he told her that he had no openings for an English teacher. Cindy was relentless. I really, really wanted to teach. She said, well, I see a ninth grade English teacher over at the colored school. Cindy jumped at the opportunity. Immediately after securing the job at Central High, Cindy drove to the school and met the principal, who informed her of a meeting the following day for all the teachers. Quickly added that she was not required to attend, which troubled Cindy. She wanted to fit in, and she did not want to be treated differently because she was white. So the next day, she walked into the Central High auditorium, where she received her first glimpse into the inequalities of black schools, rows with no seats in them, and seats with no backs or bottoms. She eyed a group of teachers congregated in the front row. She wanted to join them, but all the usable seats were taken, so she sat a few rows over, segregated from the black teachers. She soon discovered that the rest of the school was in equally bad repair. Worn, musty smelling furniture, no air conditioning, no ceiling fans, torn blinds, wooden floors that bounced, a teacher's lounge with one couch and no chairs. She wandered into the library and was horrified to find that many of the shelves were totally empty. The holdings were scant, and in a high school library, she found elementary aged books such as Brim's Boat and Maurice Sendak's picture book of A is for Alligator. Because very few employed white teachers volunteered to transfer to black schools, superintendents had to rely on new hires like Cindy Harrison to fill racial faculty quotas at black schools. The assignment of Cindy to a black school and Lillian May to white schools during the early implementation phases of massive school desegregation illustrates three significant findings of 1970. National Education Association NEA Task Force created to study the progress of school desegregation in Mississippi and Louisiana. 1. Consistently, school officials transfer the most highly qualified blacks to formerly all-white schools while replacing them in the formerly all-black schools with the least qualified whites in training and experience. 2. Black teachers are assigned to such subjects as physical education, social studies, home economics, and shop, while white teachers are assigned language arts, math, and science. Apparently, the subject assignment of black teachers is based less upon their qualifications than upon the particular racial taboo of each white community. 3. In some districts, it was reported white teachers are asked to transfer and are given the option to refuse, whereas black teachers are told their alternative is dismissal. Superintendents were the final arbiters in hiring and assigning teachers in many school districts. They assumed a very hands-on approach to doing so. In other districts, superintendents delegated the responsibilities of teacher assignment to their white principals. However, in some school districts, forced to devise desegregation plans immediately, a rather unconventional method was adopted: the use of a lottery. In December 1969, Dr. John Martin, superintendent of the Jackson Municipal Separate District, announced a two-pronged approach to achieve faculty integration in his district. They would first ask for voluntary transfers. After that, names of teachers would be drawn in a lottery to decide teachers transferred. Exempt were teachers with 18 months of being 65, the age of compulsory retirement. Martin further declared a 4-day holiday for students to shuffle the teachers. The new semester would begin on February 2nd, 1970, with the new assignments of teachers. Martin declared the lottery a success in that only 12 to 15 white teachers resigned rather than transfer to schools in black neighborhoods. However, he concluded the teacher reassignment plan based on a lottery was the most difficult, most unpleasant, and the most distasteful job I've ever done in my life. 6 months later, Martin resigned his post as superintendent. Dalton McAlpin was a second-year teacher at Callaway Junior and Senior High in Jackson when he read Martin's announcement in the paper. He and several of his fellow teachers attended the lottery held on the stage of Provine High School. Dalton describes the strangeness of the method for those of them standing around watching. It was like picking ping-pong balls out of this thing, like a lottery. I stayed for probably an hour because you really couldn't tell what was what. They weren't calling out names, they were just picking balls with numbers on them, so we couldn't figure it out, so we left. 2 days later, Dalton received a letter with his new assignment, Jim Hill High School, one of the formerly all-black schools. In many ways, teachers' assignments by lottery was a game of chance, not clearly understood, but with the odds not being transferred heavily skewed in favor of veteran teachers. And the Starkville City High School system used a lottery system to determine teacher assignments in January 1970. They devised an intricate procedure for how many chances one would have in the lottery. For example, teachers with 3 years or less teaching experience had 3 chances in the lottery, while teachers with more than 7 years of experience had only 1 chance. Teachers within 18 months of retirement were exempt from the lottery, as were principals, special education teachers, coaches, teachers who were already teaching in a school where they were the minority, and individuals with key assignments that could not be transferred because the assignment did not exist in another school. To ensure that all lottery procedures were followed and that all was fair and upfront on the day of the lottery, the Starkville School Board appointed a monitoring committee. Larry Box, a principal in Starkville, describes the logistics of the lottery. They borrowed a bingo machine from the local country club, and they took all the white second grade teachers at Overstreet, for example, and assigned them a bingo, B1, B2, whatever. They developed a rubric of experience and degrees, and you got assigned a number of bingo balls based on that. The net result being the more degrees you had and the more experience you had, you might not have but one ball in the machine. If you were a beginning teacher with a BS and no experience, you might have four balls. The more experience you had, the less chance you were going to be picked. And they would turn the machine on, and whatever ball came out of the bingo machine, they would look and say, well, that's so and so. Hinds County also used a lottery system to assign teachers in the first semester of the Alexander ruling, but teacher assignment based on a lottery system was short-lived as school systems like Jackson and Starkville scurried to comply with student desegregation in the fall of 1970. They developed alternative ways of hiring, placing, and transferring teachers, which led in many districts to the dismissal, demotion, or displacement of many black teachers. Martyrs in the Crusade, Black Teachers and School Desegregation. Running long before the Alexander ruling, Willard Gandy opined in a 1962 article in the Journal of Negro Education that the Negro teachers might very well be martyrs in the crusade to desegregate the schools. His ominous words would come to fruition in Mississippi and somewhere else in the South. According to a report published in 1970, the American Friends Service Committee, 462 black teachers were fired or did not have their contracts renewed in the 127 southern school districts visited for their study. Willie Morris was one of the first to document the loss of black teachers in Mississippi in the aftermath of the Alexander ruling. 15% of the black teachers in the state who were teaching in 69 did not have jobs in 70. In 26 school districts in Mississippi, 800 new teachers were hired in 70. Of these, only 158, or 19.7%, were black. In a study of the effects of desegregation on teachers in Mississippi from 1970 through 1973, Bobby Jean Cooper reported an increase of almost 9% in the number of white teachers as compared to an almost 12% decrease in the number of black teachers. According to the 1970 NEA task force, black teachers was displaced using three primary methods: 1. Dismissals and non-renewals, 2. Discriminatory assignments and transfer practices, and 3. Use of newly devised qualification standards. Identifying the displacement of black educators as one of the major problems of desegregation, the task force provided a terse explanation for the dismissal of so many black teachers. White racism. Gandy ends his 1962 article with a similar insight. The area of greatest difficulty is in attitudes and more of the Southern people. Attitudes, intense in nature and reinforced by the culture, will prove very difficult to alter. The attitude to which Gandy refers was the prevalent belief among whites that black teachers were not academically strong enough to teach white children. This belief was articulated in two ways. First was explicitly racist and steeped in the ideology of white supremacy, that is, black teachers were believed to be innately less intelligent than white teachers. The second reason, and the one most likely to be expressed publicly, was that black teachers were not innately less intelligent than white teachers. However, because of the vestiges of Jim Crow and years of denied opportunities in segregated schools, blacks were viewed as culturally and educationally disadvantaged as a result of their cultural and educational deprivation. They not only lacked the academic credentials and specialized training needed to teach white students, but they were also less worldly in terms of exposure to art, music, language, and other forms of high capital markers. Newspapers of the time were rife with references to the concerns of white parents about the teaching capabilities of black teachers. For example, the Leland Press reported the following in a 1969 article. Whites believe, rightly or wrongly, that black students are basically inferior to white students in aptitudes and educational achievement levels. More than that, they consider black teachers as being far below the abilities of white teachers of equivalent training. Dr. Charles Nash, who began his educational career as a teacher and then a principal in the Macomb City schools in the 1960s, is quick to offer a rebuttal to claims about the educational and cultural deficiencies of black teachers. He notes that precisely because black teachers were barred at the time from pursuing advanced degrees from the University of Mississippi, Mississippi State, and the University of Southern Mississippi, they sought opportunities out of state for educational advancement, often in large cities and in universities with much better reputations than those locally. Nash recounts. The best teachers in Macomb during this time were black teachers. I'm going to make this claim. The black teachers, the Ratcliffes, the Tobiases, the Clays, these people had degrees from Indiana and New York University and places like this. Back then, black schools in the South did not have graduate degrees, so black teachers were given a stipend by law so they could study out of state to get their masters. So they would go during the summer, and after 2 or 3 summers, they'd earn their master's degree, and they'd come back. I had a bunch of those folks. Now, I'm not saying that Ole Miss didn't do good quality teaching preparation at the master's level, but it was probably not as good in those days as was Indiana or New York University. Those people were very sophisticated. They were very well learned. They brought us not just mathematics, English, and history, they brought a lot more than that to the community. A couple of instructors from the Mississippi State came over and oops, I skipped a paragraph. Ben Peters, a black principal in the Starkville City Schools, recalls an incident when such assumptions about black teachers were challenged by the results of a teacher training workshop offered at both the black and white high schools in Starkville. A couple of instructors from Mississippi State came over and taught an extension course on the Henderson Black School campus. Some of their counterparts went to Starkville High School and taught the same course. Turned out that some of our people at Henderson scored as well or better than some of them, the white teachers did, and, of course, they got themselves a little bit of hot water by saying some of them over there, the black teachers, are as good as y'all are. That did not set well with some of the powers that were at the time. They were not supposed to say that. It was not supposed to happen. In addressing a predominantly black leadership, Emma Bragg in '63 article in the Journal of Negro Education challenged the prevailing attitudes about the superiority of white teachers while also acknowledging that black teachers had been denied professional development opportunities readily available to white teachers. She argued that in the course of school desegregation, the lack of such opportunities might disadvantage black teachers forced to compete with the white teachers for jobs. Bragg wrote, "These teachers may be equal in some instances superior in the extent of academic training as compared with our non-Negro counterparts, but do we have the quality of experience which does not appear on the academic transcript and which has been the privilege of the non-Negro teacher? Have we had the opportunity for world travel? Have we had the opportunity for workshops, seminars, conference under sponsorship of the influential and rich foundations?" Bragg noted that these qualitative differences in professional preparation were the reason for the differences in the comparative scores between black and white teachers on the National Teachers Exam, NTE, in which whites on average earned higher scores. By the end of the 1960s, school systems throughout the South increasingly began requiring teachers to take the Graduate Record Exam, GRE or NTE, as part of hiring or retention process. They then used the scores on these standardized tests as justification for dismissal or non-hiring of black teachers. In April 1968, the Starkville City High School system adopted Policy 13-69, which required all teachers, including those already working for the school system, to achieve a certain score on the GRE to have a master's degree in hand. According to Fenton Peters, the intent of this policy was clear and extremely effective in getting rid of black teachers. It was a tool for elimination because it was felt this is a racial thing, the inferiority of black people compared to white. We had to resign and reapply for our jobs, meeting the new criteria that had been set forth by the school board and superintendent that it was to make a certain score on the GRE. Turned out that the lawyers who helped handle our case found out that only about, I believe I am right, 5% of blacks scored that score, so it became very evident what that was from the start. Well, we went ahead, you had to take the test or else. You had to enroll in a graduate school and get a master's degree in a certain length of time. And of course, couple all of those things together and weeding out about 50% of the black teachers. There was a time when I was going back into the central office file to look at probable teachers and could not find a black one in there. And if I found one, it had been marked, could not meet the criteria. That left no doubts in our minds what was going on. A tool was used to purge us and the specter that still hangs over the Starkville schools right now. In May 1970, 30 black teachers in Starkville were dismissed based on the new criteria for job retention. Their dismissal sparked a series of protest marches and the arrest of more than 100 black protesters. When the school district had to hire 32 new teachers for the upcoming school year, no black teacher was hired, even though at least 6 black teachers who applied for the opening had the requisite GRE score. By 70 to 71, number of white teachers in Starkville had increased by 13, while the number of black teachers decreased by 46%. Similarly, the Okolona Municipal Separate School System and the Columbus Municipal Separate School System use the scores on the NTE for hiring and retention purposes. After such a policy was enacted in Columbus in 1970 to 71, number of black teachers dropped 22% from 133 to 103. The number of white teachers dropped 3% from 243 to 234. Day before schools were to open in August 1970, Superintendent James E. Goolsby announced there were 36 teaching vacancies. When asked if he would hire black teachers to help fill these vacancies, the superintendent replied, "I hope to fill with the best qualified teachers I can find, regardless of color." 9 black teachers who met the NTE requisite score applied for the vacant positions. None was hired. With the help of the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, and the NEA, black teachers in Starkville and Columbus filed lawsuits against their school districts for unlawful dismissal. In 71, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Mississippi ruled that the use of NTE and GRE scores for selection and retention of teachers was unconstitutional. Both school districts were ordered to reinstate their dismissed black teachers. In their ruling, the federal court reprimanded the school district for using the GRE and NTE examinations for purposes for which they were not designed. The intended effect of this misuse clearly was, as the court stated, to bar proportionally more black teachers than white teachers for reemployment and hiring. Throughout the 1970s, black teachers continued to file lawsuits against their school districts for unlawful displacement using the Singleton factors set forth by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Singleton v. Jackson Municipal Separate School District, 1969. In the Singleton case, the court set forth guidelines for how school districts were to handle faculty reductions, desegregation, due to the exigencies of school desegregation. First, the school system must implement and communicate clear, objective, non-discriminatory standards for handling dismissals and demotions. Second, any reduction could not alter the ratio of black and white teachers in the system. Lastly, no vacancy after the reduction could be filled by hiring a teacher of a race different from the teacher dismissed. The rulings of the multiple teacher dismissal cases in the 70s varied greatly. For example, in McCormick versus Atala, 1976, the federal district court ruled that Miss Erlyn McCormick, a black teacher in the Atala School District who was not rehired for the 73-74 school year due to a decline in the district's average daily attendance, ADA, was not entitled to reinstatement under the Singleton factors because Atala County had achieved unitary status before she was not rehired. The Singleton factors were only applicable to school systems that had not achieved unitary status. In the case, the courts ruled that Atala School District had achieved unitary status because during the 3 years following the 1970 desegregation order, public school integration was well accepted by the black and white communities throughout Atala County and by school students, patrons, teachers, and administrators. The transition was accomplished without undue impediment or confusion. On the other hand, in Kegler versus East Tallahatchie School District, the court ruled that Albert S. Burton, who was dismissed in 72 because of a decrease in student enrollment, was entitled to reinstatement for unlawful dismissal. The East Tallahatchie School District argued that Singleton did not apply since the district implemented its desegregation plan in 70. The court disagreed and ruled that the school district had failed to achieve unitary status because the 2 years since 1970 were marked by hectic school and community upheaval and delayed faculty reduction. Thus, teachers in East Tallahatchie fell under the umbrella of Singleton's protection. The school district was ordered to rehire Burton. This displacement of black teachers during massive desegregation led Victor Solomon, Associate Director of the Congressman of Racial Equality, CORE, to assert in December 1969 that the school desegregation was a failure because it had sapped black schools of their talented teachers and Negro scholars. Solomon pleaded for a return to black neighborhood schools run by black school boards with black teachers given the resources equal to that of the white schools. Solomon stated, "It is an insulting assertion to say that a black school cannot be a good school because of its blackness." In Mississippi, most black teachers in 1969 were not ready to abandon school desegregation efforts, yet rather they organized. In January 1970, the Negro Mississippi Teachers Association formed the Educational Resources Center to act as an umbrella organization for the various individuals and entities filing complaints and lawsuits against their school systems. The coalition was particularly vocal about whites setting up private schools for themselves but fighting to retain control over black people in public schools. They vowed to take appropriate action to stop the new ways of discrimination. Teaching in the unknown. On the first day of school in her new teaching assignment at Marks High, Lily B. Davis did not know what to expect. "I was scared as a rabbit from a dog. My husband told me, 'Now I don't know how things will go for you, but if things don't go well, I'll be driving up and down the street. Just run out now and I'll pick you up in the truck.'" Lily gives credit to the principal who made the decision that the two sections of second grade would be both be taught by black teachers. This prevented white parents from requesting that the child be placed in the white teacher's classroom. Of the 27 students in her second grade class, only 3 were black. Lily explains how the first day was a trial for all of them, but day by day, classroom interactions improved. At first morning, I went in, and I stood before the children, and I tried to have a devotion, and they just looked at me. They just stared at me. They didn't open their mouths. I tried to sing a little song that children used to sing, but they didn't say anything. Said a little scripture, said a little prayer. Then I introduced myself to them, told them I would be their teacher, and they were still quiet. And then I tried to get them to loosen up. I like to teach reading as my first subject, and I wanted to start it with a little playful game where you clap your hands, and I finally got them to do that. And the next morning, we were back at school, and the children did better and better. You see, children will do well if the parents will not talk about them and try not to make them dislike people. Children will just naturally love you anyway. So later on, the children just started. They would line up to hug me before they leave in the evening. Cindy Harrison was also nervous about her new teaching assignment at Central High in Oxford. Unlike Lily, she did not have any teaching experience to help prepare for the first day of class. What she did have was a passion for teaching with a good dose of youthful idealism. She recalls her excitement when she received from the principal a list of names of her students. "It's like being pregnant. You love your baby before you see it, and I loved those students before I ever saw them. I thought some of the names were strange, and I wondered how I was going to pronounce some of them, but I thought, well, we could get through this together." On the night before the first day of school, Cindy could hardly sleep. The night before I was to meet my students, I had the weirdest thought. I wanted to be the best teacher that these kids ever had. And I just sort of woke up in the middle of the night and I thought, what if somebody asked me to explain what a nominative absolute is? So the very next morning, I got up early and flipped through my old notebooks and I went over some very difficult grammar constructions because I wanted to be ready. As they prepared for their first days of teaching in a new setting, Lily and Cindy relied on their professional training and their academic backgrounds to plan what they would do in the classroom. But being an effective teacher requires more than just content knowledge and a toolkit of instructional strategies. Teachers complete dozens of ordinary tasks and routines every day based on taken for granted knowledge, but when school desegregation occurred, nothing could be taken for granted. Suddenly, the mundane, such as the faculty meetings, Christmas parties, hall duty, parent conferences, and cafeteria small talk, took on significant import, and teachers caught in the desegregation crosshairs, regardless of their own political beliefs and actions, had to negotiate both the mundane and the larger cultural changes occurring around them as they tried to fill their duties as a classroom teacher. School desegregation often put black and whites together for the first time, yet years of segregation had bred distrust, fear, and ignorance of each other. Thus, many teachers were ill equipped to negotiate with social integration brought about by the school desegregation. The teacher's lounge could be a particularly tense place. It was one of the few spaces on campus for teachers to socialize and interact on a more informal basis. For Lily B. Davis, her outsider status as one of the only black teachers in the school was most pronounced when she entered the teacher's lounge. Far from being a solace from the students and the constant challenges of teaching, the lounge was an inhospitable place, as Lily describes. I would walk into the teacher's lounge and everybody would get quiet. I'd go in there and do what I needed to do, take care of my needs, and come on out. May D. Martin spent a year at elementary school in Cleveland as the only black teacher and one of only 3 blacks in the entire school, the other 2 being the cook and janitor. May D. describes the importance of the lounge for her in demonstrating that, yes, she wanted to be an integral part of the faculty, but she would not allow anyone to intimidate her. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I would go to the lounge and get some coffee and have sugar and cream because I'm going to sit in there. You see, I grew up in Texas. I didn't grow up in Mississippi. I didn't grow up in the cotton fields. We owned over 2,000 acres down at the old home place, and I didn't have to go and work for anybody. But I went to the lounge and they all respected me. Never had a problem. I knew how to mix, but one of the black teachers at the other school would take her lunch and go in the lounge, and she would cry because she didn't want to be over there. For James George, a black teacher at Carrollton High School in 1970, the strain between his white principal and him began the first day they met. George was a native of Carroll County. When he graduated from Alcorn Agricultural and Mechanical College in 1967, he began teaching agricultural education at Viden High School, an all black school in Carroll County. At the time, a few black students attended the white schools under FOC, but in '69, the schools in Carrollton were still largely segregated. In fall 1970, Carroll County was court ordered to desegregate its schools. When schools opened in fall 1970, George was still teaching shop at Viden High, although it had been converted to an elementary school. In late September, he was informed that he would be transferred immediately to J.Z. George High School, the formerly all white school. When George casually called the white principal at J.Z. George High School by his first name in a conversation between the two, the principal quickly reprimanded him, "That's Mister to you." When the star student, an award given to the top student of the school, who was white, chose Mr. George as the teacher that most influenced him, the principal failed to tell George of the day and time of the awards banquet held in Jackson. Fortunately, the secretary of the school gave him the information. Problems between these two began to escalate when George discovered tools taken illicitly from his shop strewn about the school campus. The principal blamed him for failing to properly store school property. The discord reached a climax when George discovered that his principal had ventured into his shop while he was not there and cut the locks off 3 of his tool cabinets. Seething, he confronted the principal. He explains what happened next. I told him off. He said, "Let's just ride to the superintendent's office." I said, "No, you get in your car and I'll get in mine. I'm not riding with you." Headed to the office, superintendent asked, "Did you do that?" And he said, "Yeah, I needed some tools." Superintendent said, "Are those from James' classroom?" He said, "Yeah, but those are tools everybody uses." Superintendent said, "No. I'm going to buy him 9 new locks and he can put all locks on all the cabinets and you cut another one." "Well, I'll just fire him." The superintendent said, "If you don't do what I ask you to, I will fire a principal." Then he went storming out of there. After 2 years, the principal left, but for the time he was there, he and George had little to say to each other. It was tough, very tough. The thing is, you did your job, but you didn't feel free doing it. I was on pins and needles all the time. He recalls. When asked if he was ever thought of leaving, George summarized the thoughts of many black teachers who felt unwelcome in their new desegregated school environment. "Where are you going? There was trouble everywhere. It takes a whole lot more than that to run me away from my home." Like James George, Lily V. Davis was determined that she would be not intimidated. She would be not be intimidated in her new teaching environment. But surviving that first year was definitely a challenge. She received harassing phone calls, rife with vulgarities and profanities. On several occasions, she was refused service in the local grocery store. But it was the social isolation and the feeling that she simply was not wanted the most tested her resolve. Her position as an outsider was made abundantly clear to her in December when she was not only excluded from planning the annual Christmas party in her own classroom, but shunned during the festivities. Lily describes that lonely event. So coming up for the Christmas party, the parents came and met, and they decided how they were going to give the party and what they were going to do for the party. And I was not included, so on the afternoon of the party, I was just somebody sitting there. I wasn't asked anything, I was just nobody over there. I just sat there. Sometimes there are things in life we have to accept them. We can't do nothing but accept them because I know that things are going to get better. I knew that. One of the changes that occurred in many elementary schools as part of school desegregation was the departmentalization of elementary schools. Instead of a first or second grader staying in the same classroom all day, with the same teacher responsible for teaching all subjects, students rotated between two or more teachers. In upper elementary, it was not uncommon for students to have 4 to 5 different teachers, one for language arts, one for math, one for science, one for social studies, and one for physical education. Mae D. Martin describes how departmentalization was utilized at her elementary school in Cleveland to ensure that white students had limited contact with black teachers. As a fifth grade teacher, they would never let me teach them the entire 6 weeks. I would teach 3 weeks reading, and I was paired with a white lady, and then she would swoop in and teach my students English for 3 weeks. It was to satisfy the parents so they were not taught everything by one black teacher. The sudden adoption of such practices as team teaching or departmentalization did not just coincidentally occur concomitantly with school desegregation. According to the 1970 NEA report of 70 segregated school districts in Louisiana and Mississippi, departmentalization at the elementary school was used excessively. The report notes that both black and white teachers said this irrational scheduling of classes was not educationally sound for young children. One task force member declared, "Some children have 4 to 6 teachers in a single day. White teachers as well as black are disturbed about this." The NEA report notes that the new ways of organizing the day and assigning students to multiple teachers in the elementary school was explicitly designed to limit the contact white students had with black teachers. When Cindy Harrison began teaching in the segregated black high school in Oxford, she was not prepared for the abject poverty of most of her students. Of the 125 students she taught, only one wore glasses. Most suffered terribly from toothaches because visiting a dentist was a luxury they could ill afford. A ballpoint pen was practically unheard of, and most of her students came to school with no pencils or paper. After a few days of noticing that many of her students stepped off the buses in the morning clutching lemons, Cindy asked her principal for an explanation. "To kill hunger pangs, they suck on a hole in the lemon," he replied. Despite her noble intentions and a solid educational background at a strong liberal arts college, Cindy felt she failed miserably those first few weeks. I tried to explain these things, but I could only see they were confused, or that or they'd put their heads on their desk. I was losing them constantly. I was constantly reminded of what the years of discrimination had done to them. I cried every night for the first few weeks. I really didn't know what I could do with them. How could I ever give them grades? How could I ever work miracles and make everything better for them? Cindy persevered. She introduced diagramming sentences. She created her own worksheets with humorous grammatical errors for them to detect. I found a purple lady's coat. She introduced poetry, reading, and writing, in which some of her students found success as they penned poignant expressions of their life experiences, such as the following: "On a farm, your work is never done, and you work from morning, noon, and night. On a farm, your work is never done. Oh, how I like to be in the city, and I'm here on a farm, and my work is never done." At the annual Christmas party, Cindy's students surprised her with a gift. They bought from money they had pulled together 2 placemats and 3 napkins. The gift brought her to tears, and she was thanking her students for all they had taught her that semester. Frances, one of the poorest girls in the class, who had spent most of her recess in Cindy's class because she did not have a coat, presented her with her own Christmas gift, a blue ballpoint pen. I really could not say anything. I tried. I think I said, "Thank you, Frances," but that was about all I could say. But I looked up at her. She had gone back to her chair and she sat down, and she was just hugging herself and trying to smile and cover her mouth at the same time. She was so proud of what she had done. At the end of the semester, the principal announced that when school resumed after Christmas break, their school would be a junior high, housing grades 7 through 9, and all the white students from Oxford Middle School would be joining them. Central High would no longer exist. After this announcement at a school assembly, many of the students and teachers broke out in tears. They stood to sing their alma mater for the last time. Then they joined together to sing a song Cindy had never heard. "Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmony of liberty." Every student in the auditorium was singing the Black National Anthem. Cindy concedes, and she did not begin her job teaching in a segregated school with a political bone in her body, but she received a crash course in the politics of race in schooling. Not only did she experience firsthand the inequalities between black and white schools in terms of facilities, resources, and funding, but when the Oxford City Schools opened in 1970 of January, as fully segregated schools, she discovered that her students' second class status would continue in the new schools. The method would be called ability grouping or tracking, and most of Cindy's students were placed in the lowest track, thus continuing to learn in largely segregated all black classrooms. Dalton McAlpin, who was also thrust into the racial politics of the day with little preparation on how to handle the ramifications of those politics in his school or classroom, recently graduated from Louisiana State University. Dalton began teaching in 1968 because he was not quite sure what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. During the second semester of his second year, he was assigned to Jim Hill High School, a formerly all black high school. On the first day at this new school, Mr. Emmett Hayes, the black principal, corralled the 10 or 15 new white teachers into a classroom. He introduced the assistant principal, gave a spiel about how this was going to be a trying year, and asked them to please work together as a team with the black teachers to make the school year a success. When he finished, one of the white teachers asked, "Mr. Hayes, do you have any advice to give to us? Some of us haven't been working in a desegregated situation at all. What would be a good piece of advice for us?" Mr. Hayes bluntly responded, "Well, the first thing I would suggest to you is that you do not use the N word in the school." Such were the realities, Dalton discovered, of teaching in the midst of controversy of school desegregation. At their first faculty meeting, the tension between the black and white teachers were palpable. Dalton explains, "It became painfully obvious to us that many of them were not happy that they had us. It was more body language than anything. Nobody said anything, but it was just real standoffish. It took about a month for the ice to break, but that initial first week or so was real tense among faculty because they, looking at it from their standpoint, they didn't know who they were getting as their colleagues and what our attitudes were going to be. And we didn't know what their attitudes were going to be. I mean, it was kind of a Mexican standoff. After about a month, the ice broke. They realized we were not monsters and vice versa. Dalton attributes the most positive interactions between the black and white teachers to Mr. Hayes, a shining example of what a principal should be like in that kind of situation. Because he had the ability to spread oil on troubled waters. One of those potentially troubling times was when Mr. Hayes found out that the white teachers were meeting together socially on the weekends. Dalton describes those meetings and Mr. Hayes' response. And during the spring, we got together 2 or 3 times at various people's apartments to kind of commiserate with each other about our lot in life being in the middle of all this. And somebody dubbed those get togethers as white survival parties, and of course, word immediately got back to the black teachers and administrators that the white were having these parties, and Mr. Hayes asked me specifically by the end of the year, "Let's not do this anymore, it's a problem, and y'all have certainly survived, and we have survived you. So is it okay? Can you do that, not do that next year?" Dalton and most of the white teachers stopped meeting for white survival parties. However, sometimes the tension between black and white teachers or principals was not so easily resolved. Dalton concedes that at Jim Hill High, there were a few black and white teachers who never did warm up. They came, they did their job, and they went home. On May 15th, 1970, on his usual morning route to school, Dalton encountered what seemed to be a riot of some kind. When I turned the corner, the street was full of kids, all black, and it was clear that there was some kind of disturbance. I hadn't had the radio on or anything, so I slowly drove through them. And people are pounding on my car and pounding on my windshield, and I got through that group and went around the corner to get to the staff parking lot, and I went inside and I said, "What the hell is going on?" Mr. Hayes said, "You haven't heard the news?" And I said, "No." "Well, the highway patrol shot up Jackson State last night, and a couple of people were killed. This is a very dangerous day for all of us because it's really incited everybody." For the rest of the day, everyone was on edge. Many of the black students were absent and not much instruction occurred. Mr. Hayes vigilantly walked the halls, making sure no disturbances or incidents of violence occurred in his school. At the end of the day, they found out that one of those killed was a student in Dalton's class, James Earl Green. For the next few days, Dalton and the other social studies teachers were suspended their planned teaching activities. Instead, as Dalton explains, we got together, the black and white social studies teachers, and we thought maybe the thing to do is just discuss civilly in our classes and let people vent about it, without getting out of control. On the day of Green's funeral, classes were dismissed, and Dalton and the white teachers that were attended the funeral rode in the car with the black football coach, who was concerned for the safety of his colleagues, given the racially charged atmosphere of the day. With a hope and a prayer, Hollywood loves to make movies about heroic white teachers who sweep into horrific schools marked by violence, neglect, and incompetent teachers to save their black and Latino students from the predetermined fates that await them because they're black/Latino, poor, and victims of structural and institutional racism. This is not the story told in this chapter. Neither hero nor villains. The blacks and white teachers featured in this book were in many ways simply trying to make it through the day, week in, month, implementing a top down educational reform that was still being challenged and debated in the courts, at their local school board meetings, at the Department of Justice and HEW offices in Washington, D.C., and in their state capital. Mandates, policies, and directions changed constantly, yet they and their students were directed to have school as usual. Working through school desegregation required teachers to attend to the technical professional requirements needed to be a good teacher while also trying to make sense of their own racialized, personal, and collective histories as the social, cultural, and educational landscapes they knew so well were rapidly changing. In his book, There Goes My Everything, White Southerners in Age of Civil Rights, Jason Sokal notes that most white Southerners identified neither with the civil rights movement nor its violent resistors. This is an apt description of many white teachers like Cindy Harrison and Dalton McAlpin, who fell into the throes of teaching through desegregation by timing more than anything else. Cindy admits that back in 1969, I didn't have a political agenda. I wasn't trying to right any wrongs. I needed a paycheck and they needed a teacher. But the experience was life changing for Dalton and Cindy and countless other white teachers. Teaching during this time of social and racial upheaval created a critical dissonance between their own comfortable and often sheltered upbringing in the South and lived the realities of their black students and colleagues, who heretofore had been largely invisible to them. They were forced to question the racial politics, etiquette, and mores of their white upbringing, and in doing so, unlearn and relearn much of what they had been taught growing up white in the Deep South. Certainly, it is easy to portray Cindy Harrison's enthusiasm and prodigious declarations of love for her black students at Central High as a form of naivete, possible only because of the privileged life she had lived as a white Southerner. But such an interpretation fails to capture the sense of hope that drove many white teachers like Cindy Harrison, Dalton McAlpin, Harriet Kukendale, and Joanne Pritchard Morris to approach their teaching through school desegregation as if their decisions made a difference. This hope is what David Haplin calls absolute hope. Absolute hope entails a basic, even naive, kind of faith in the future involving a taken for granted belief that is always better to seek the future involving a taken for granted belief. Whoops. Taken for granted belief. It is always better to seek ways of improving things that are not working out rather than to leave them as they are. Absolute hope is what kept Cindy Harrison from falling into despair over her teaching conditions, her classroom, her own lack of preparation, and the impoverished lives of her students. Absolute hope is what drove Dalton and his coworkers to abandon their lesson plans for several days so that students could talk through their grief over the death of their classmate and work through the anxieties about racism and violence. And it was hope undergirding the many decisions white teachers made to create classrooms where their students, both black and white, would be protected from the disorder and negativity occurring outside the school walls. Haplin refers to also to a different form of hope called ultimate hope, which, unlike absolute hope, is an aimed hope, which has an object, or more accurately, a better specific state of affairs in mind. This is the type of hope that kept Lily V. Davis, May D. Martin, James George, and the other black teachers persevering through the trials and tribulations of school desegregation. They withstood the obvious affronts based solely on their race, the routinely displayed lack of respect for them and their black students, and the institutional tactics aimed at keeping blacks suppressed because, as Lily Davis explains, they kept their eyes squarely focused on the prize. We wanted educational equality for our children. That's all we wanted, and we wanted them to have the same chance and the same opportunity that other children had. Black teachers knew that goal would not come quickly nor would it be easy, and far too many suffered professionally. What kept them getting up and going to school every day was an ultimate hope that holds up the prospect of a better way of life, for oneself, for others, and for society generally, while recognizing they are likely to be obstacles on the way that will need to be challenged and overcome. As Lily Davis sat alone in the corner of the room while her white students and parents celebrated the annual Christmas party, she did not fall into despair. She kept the faith and she kept coming back day in and day out. I know that things are going to get better. I knew that. For 20 years, Lily continued to teach in the public schools, and Mark's facing multiple obstacles, including the return to segregated schools for black children when the entire white population fled to the private school. After retiring, Lily decided to run for school board in 2006 because she was concerned that the school system was failing to provide the prospect of a better way of life for hundreds of black students in her school district. She was elected and worked tirelessly for another 10 years as a school board member in Quitman County. That is the end of chapter 5 of Just Trying to Have School.